a general promise as we're on the verge of entering a new year. But by general, I don't mean just generic or substandard or ordinary or partly irrelevant or any of that. In fact, this is arguably one of the greatest promises, one of the most comforting promises found in Scripture. It is a diamond in Scripture. It is a gem in Scripture. It is a nugget of liberating truth. And I'm referring to a verse that probably most of you know by heart. I'm referring to Romans 8:28, which says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them who love God and are called according to His purpose." Now, I understand that most of you have memorized this verse and internalized this verse and probably recall this verse time and again during different seasons of your life. But this evening, I want to dissect this verse. I want to divide this verse. I want to break up this verse into 4 different categories so that we fully grasp the worth of this verse, the value of this verse. And the first phrase is, "and we know." And so the first aspect that I want to highlight this evening is, it is confidence creating. And we know. Isn't there a ring of certainty to it? A ring of definiteness to it? 32 times the Apostle Paul uses this phrase, "and we know." 5 times in the book of Romans. The Greek scholar Kenneth Weiss says this verse should be translated, "and we know with absolute knowledge." We know with absolute certainty. But it's true that we don't know everything, right? There are a lot of things that we don't know in this life. I mean, if you think about it, just 2 verses earlier, verses 26, the Apostle Paul says, we don't know how we always ought to pray. Just 2 verses earlier. Habakkuk, the prophet, when he's interceding and when he's standing in the gap for his nation, he says, "How long, Lord? How long? How much more time? How long will you delay? How long should we wait before you intervene, before we receive our breakthrough?" Isaac said, "I don't know the day of my death." James chapter 4, he says, "We don't know what tomorrow will bring." Jesus said, "You don't know the hour of my return." There are a lot of things in this life that we don't know. Many of us don't know what 2023 holds. Yes, some of us, we know our routines, we have planned some things, but we don't know what 2023 holds for each one of us. But we look to Him. Our eyes are on Him. You know that interview question when they ask you, where do you see yourself 5 years from now? If you're being honest, the answer is we don't know, right? But often we cook up some stories. I see myself managing certain projects. I just want to land a job. But the truth is, we don't know what we're going to do 5 years, 10 years from now. We don't know many things. But there is one thing that we can be certain about, according to the Apostle Paul. You know, Freddie's son Rafa, over the last 3 weeks, every now and then he'll come and ask me a question. You know why he asks me a question in regards to the Bible? You know why he asks me a question? Because he assumes that I know the answer. He has confidence that I know the answer. Well, we have chatted a couple of times. I hope his confidence is not shaken after talking to him a couple of times. I hope the answers are satisfactory. But he does that because he has confidence that I might be able to give him a substantial answer. That's why he does that. And we enjoy having those conversations. But I feel like, especially in our Indian culture, sometimes we struggle to say 3 words. I don't know. Often we want to pretend like we know. We're very willing to cook up stories on the spot. Everybody has an opinion on everything under the sun. They'll tell you, "I know why she's going through that. I know why he's going through that." Everybody knows everything. We always have an opinion. The truth is, very often we don't know everything that's happening. I remember, before Google Maps and all came, those days, if you ask somebody how to go, they'll just say, even if they don't know, they'll just go straight, keep going straight, and you'll come to the destination. They don't know. They just don't want to admit that they don't know the directions to the place. So people don't like to admit that they don't know. Even when I ask questions over here, maybe on Sunday, sometimes we hesitate. We hesitate because we're not confident. We're not confident about the answer. If you're 100% confident, maybe everybody will tell the answer. But it's because of our lack of confidence. But there are certain things that we as Christians, we as believers can be absolutely confident of. And so I believe that this verse, this phrase, and we know, points to the fact that we can be confident of certain things. What can we be confident of? The next phrase says, and we know that all things. And so number 2, that all things. Go to the next slide, please. Yeah. That all things talks about complete coverage. Paul says that all things, it means all, in the Greek it's the word ponta. What does ponta mean? All things. One preacher said it like this: all means all, and that's all that all means. It means every single thing, whether it's good, whether it's bad. Everything is taken care of. Everything is under the control of God. Even those things we doubt, it's under the sovereignty of God. It is complete coverage. Over a couple of days ago, we had gone to spend a small vacation with Anisha's relatives somewhere near Mahabalipuram. So it was in between Pondicherry and Chennai. And her relatives are quite wealthy and they have this beautiful beach house. And so we went and stayed with them. We ate some good food. And Anisha's uncle has this nice, beautiful car, luxury car, Mercedes S-Class. So it's not even a C-Class. C-Class is entry. It's not even an E-Class. E-Class is somewhere in between. This is an S-Class. So it's really posh. It's very nice. And we got to go for a drive in it. And I was thinking as we were going, what if something happens to this car? I just Googled the value, the worth of the car and found out that it's 1.6 crores. And so I was thinking, what if somebody steals this car? So he was explaining about the different insurance packages that they have. And I'm only familiar with 2 kinds of insurance. One is third-party insurance, the one that I'm always tempted to take to save some money. But the problem with third-party is that if you get into an accident, they only cover the people that you bang into or the other vehicle that you damage. So you also want to think of your own vehicle, and so you end up going for a comprehensive package or comprehensive insurance. But he talked about one more category that comes under this comprehensive insurance called return to invoice. So he was explaining, he was saying, supposing your car gets stolen or there's floods or there's a tsunami or something like that, you will get the entire value of your car. Of course, to pay for that sort of insurance is way more expensive. But he's saying, when you own a car that is this valuable, you have to take that sort of insurance. It's called return to invoice. In other words, it's complete coverage. And I just want to remind each one of us this evening that you and me are much more valuable to God than that car is to Anisha's uncle. And he values that car, and he should. And he's a great man. But you are more valuable to God. And he cares about every aspect of your life. That's why 1 Peter 5:7 says, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. He's the God who won't even let a sparrow fall without his knowledge. God watches over. Somebody once said God attends the funeral service of every sparrow. He knows everything, right? He clothes the lilies in the valley. So he cares for each one of us, and he cares about every single detail of our lives. Those times of adversity, those times of pain, suffering, trauma, whatever it is, those times of relationship hiccups, or times of financial stress, whatever it is, those things that we struggle to deal with. He cares for each one of those things. So it's complete coverage. He has everything under his control. The next part of the verse, number 3, says, works together for good. And here, we're talking about his collaborative care. Because somebody might say, so you're saying all things are good, so you're saying rape is good, you're saying the death of a child, is that good? No, I'm not saying that that's good, that's bad, that's evil. But the point is, the verse makes it explicitly clear that they all work together for good. In and of itself, it's terrible, it's bad, let's call it what it is. To say that rape is good, or to say that a death of a child is good would be a fallacy, it would be erroneous thinking. But the point is, according to Apostle Paul, writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he says they work together for good. The Greek word is the word synergeo, which we get our English word synergism from. working together. When I was a little child, one of the fancy words that I learned growing up was the word collaboration. So I tried to use it as much as possible. And in the context in which I learned it was, I go around saying that Maruti did a collaboration with Suzuki. So I go around explaining to everybody, 5, 6 years old, I constantly use this word collaboration. So basically it's when two parties come together, they cooperate to bring about a desired effect. So even those things, even those areas of our life that are not pleasant, even those areas of our life that we're not very proud of, and I'm sure each one of us have regrets, even looking back at 2022, there are certain things we may not be very proud of, certain things we wish if we had an eraser, we can just erase, get rid of, rewrite, redo, a do-over. But God is able to take all those things, and when He puts it into, and when He masterfully blends it into all His purposes, all His plans, He's able to bring out something beautiful out of even those mistakes or those messes or those blemishes or those blunders that we make. One example, one analogy that I find helpful, there are many, but one that I chose is cinnamon. There was something called Cinnamon Challenge, where people would just take this mouthful of cinnamon and see if they could digest it, right? And it's physically impossible. I saw this one video where 100 people attempted to do it and all 100 failed. But that doesn't mean that cinnamon rolls are not nice, right? That doesn't mean, there's so many one, like my sister makes good cinnamon coffee, very flavorsome, very enjoyable. So cinnamon in the right proportion, in the right blend, is very flavorsome, very tasty, and also has a lot of health benefits. But if you just take a spoon, a raw spoon of cinnamon, and it's extracted from a tree bark, extremely dry, so it'll just get stuck to the back of your throat, and it'll cause that gag reflex, and you will start coughing it all out, right? So there are some things in our life when we consider some instances, some experiences in our life, when we look at it in isolation, when we look at it, just separately, they seem very unpleasant. And you say, what good can come out of that situation? How can God allow that in my life? Or how can God allow that in my child's life? But when taken together, when you look at His master plan, what He's doing in the big picture, He knows what He's doing. He's a wise God, He's a powerful God. When He puts it into His chemistry lab, He's able to bring out something beautiful out of what we think can never be turned into something good or something productive. I think a slightly humorous story to explain this would be just recently, the day before Christmas, I was walking down Hutchins Road. So I was on an evening walk, and Anisha was in some parlor nearby, so I was just trying to kill some time listening to a sermon, walking down this Hutchins Road area. And I crossed one intersection, and there was a car that just went ahead of me. So I was behind the car. And as I was crossing the back of that car, suddenly I saw the reverse lights come on. So I had my ears plugged, I was listening to a sermon. Suddenly I saw the reverse lights come on and the car started backing into me. So I just quickly tried to jump out of the way and I made it to safety. It didn't look gracious at all. It was a little bit of a panic. I jumped out of the way and then I was indignant. So I was like staring at the driver. I was about to say something, but I just paused for a brief moment and I looked at the driver. I was giving him a stare. And then he just did this. Okay, as in he was telling me to look behind who was sitting behind. And so I looked inside and it was Pastor Vasu. Okay, so I was about to shout at his driver. I was about to give him a piece of my mind, but I was so glad that I held my ground. Because it was Pastor Vasu and his driver was going around. And then he told me to come and sit down. And then he prayed for me. So just a simple example of how all things work together for good, right? So if I just was, opened my mouth a little too soon, I might have regretted it. I just waited, I was patient. James talks about the power of the tongue. So I waited patiently, and then after that, it was a blessing. It worked for my good. We had a good conversation, went for a round around the block, and he encouraged me, and then I went on my way. It also says, all things work together for good. And good is as God defines it. So I think God mostly has ultimate good in mind over here, over situational good. I'm not saying that He's not interested in your situation or my situation or our circumstances. He definitely is. He's somebody who's close to the brokenhearted. He cares. He's a God of details. But he's also interested in our ultimate good. The fact that each one of us become more like his son. And the way I like to explain it is by using this story that I heard from this one preacher, famous preacher. He talked about this one guy who had gone bowling. He was a very good bowler. And I think in bowling, if you get all 12 strikes, you get a score of 300. That's a perfect score. I sometimes just barely make it over 100 when I go bowling, the few times that I've gone bowling. But if you get a perfect game, you get 300 points. But to get a perfect series, you need to get 36 strikes, which then means you get 900 points, which means all 12, so 12 into 3, 36, which then means 900 points. You get a perfect series. And it's only been done 21 times in history. So there's this one guy called Bill Form who's on the 34th strike. So he is 3 strikes away from absolute perfection, going down in history as one of the greatest bowlers. And 34th strike is feeling a little bit dizzy, but he somehow manages all 10 pins fall flat on the ground. Then the 35th round, again 10 pins fall flat on the ground. 36th, the last one right now, right? So he does, his 5 steps, he holds the ball close to his chest, he lets go, looks perfect, people start clapping even before the ball hits the pins. Perfect curve, hits it at the right spot. The 10th pin starts wobbling but then goes back to its base and it stands still. So 1 pin, so instead of 900, his score is 899. He went back home and he was still feeling a little bit dizzy, and that night he threw up and he went to sleep. And the next morning he found out that he had a stroke. And then after a couple of days he went for open heart surgery, and the doctors told him that it was that that score of 899 that probably saved his life, because if he got 900, if he got all the points, he was already in the midst of a stroke. And they say if he got that 900, he would have started to celebrate and his blood pressure would have shot up, to an all-time high, and that would have probably been the end of him. That would have probably killed him. So he probably thought that was the worst night of his life. But in reality, it was a blessing in disguise, right? And so I think that that's a great analogy for so many of the things that God does like that in our life. So many times we think, oh, this is an absolute curse from God. I don't understand why this is happening. But behind the scenes, our wise God, our powerful God knows exactly what He's doing. And He's orchestrating things in our favor. And He will work all things together for the good of those who love Him. The last thing that I want to leave us with today, number 4, it says, to them that love God and are called according to His purpose. So there is a conditional caution. This is probably the most important thing, right? Because I'm reminded of the story where in 1903, many of you will know this story, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, the Wright brothers began to fly for the first time. Monumental event in history. So they fly like 120 feet. They send this telegram or whatever they used at that time to their sister saying that we have flown 120 feet. And at the bottom, they added this addendum which said, we'll be home for Christmas. So the sister took that cutting or whatever, that message that they had wired across, to the newspaper editor. And the newspaper editor looked at it and said, oh great, they'll be home for Christmas. He missed the point. The point is they had flown 120 feet. That was it. They had made history over here, but he went and saw that bottom line saying, oh great, they'll be home for Christmas. So likewise, when we look at this promise, we know that all things work together, but for who? For them that love God and are called according to His purpose. So basically, for believers, for people who truly love. From the human standpoint, it is us who love God. From the divine standpoint, it is us who have been called according to His purpose. Just two ways of stating it, from the human standpoint, from the divine standpoint. And so there is a conditional caution at the very end. It is for those of us who love Him and are called according to His purpose. I remember in 1930, 6, I think it was, there was this historic radio broadcast. I really like this story because it makes a great connection to what Jesus did for each one of us, how he displayed his love for each one of us. So there was this historic radio broadcast that was going to go out. It was King Edward VIII who was going to address, he was based in England, he was going to address the people of America through the radio. And just about before he was going to go and he's going to give his speech, somebody in the radio station was running around and the main wire got cut, snapped basically. And everybody was panicking, all the producers, all the executives were panicking. Then last minute, one bright intern took the wire and he just held both the wires. And so as soon as the king began to give his speech, the words were literally transmitted through his body. And that is precisely what Jesus did for each one of us. He transmitted the voice of heaven for each one of us. He brought heaven down. He came down and he exegeted, or he explained what God the Father is like. Without Jesus, none of us would even have access to the Father. Jesus declared, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And that's how he lavished his love for us. The same God who's our great high priest was able to empathize with us, who lives to intercede for each one of us. And that's how he loved us. He first loved us. Now, how do we respond to that? How do we show him our love? Because this promise is only true for us who love him. And so maybe we should think of ways that we can improve on loving God in 2023. Because then we can definitely claim this promise. Then we can absolutely believe that all things will work together. That's a very powerful promise if you think about it. All things, whatever, good, bad, up, down, all things will work together. And now for this story, not very far from here, you have this Ascension Church. Next to that you have, I think there used to be a school there, I don't know if it's still there. So when I was in my 8th or 9th standard, we came there for inter-school relay. We have about 6 minutes more. We came there for inter-school relay, and I was the first guy running for the relay team. I was never the last guy because I wasn't fast enough. The last guy is always the fastest, called the anchor, right? So I was always the first guy. So inter-school relay, we were there. I was always used to running 100 meters, never longer than that. So I was never a long distance runner. Could run 100 meters fairly fast. So when we came to that track, I was prepared to run 100 meters. But then when I found out that it was actually a 200 meter, each person had to run 200 meters and the entire race was 800 meters. So I didn't know why I wasn't trained for that. When the race began, I ran like as if it was a 100 meter sprint. But after 100 meters, I started losing steam. And so because of that, by the time I got to the end, I was supposed to pass the baton to the other guy. I was like thinking, why is he running away from me? That's what you're supposed to do. But I was getting so frustrated because I was already so tired. I just wanted him to wait for me to pass the baton, but he was running away from me. So I was basically losing steam over there. I wasn't trained for that. But I just was reminded as I thought about that our God doesn't lose steam. According to Philippians 1:6, God who began the good work within each one of us is faithful to carry it on until completion. Right, until it bears complete fruit. So he's a God who does not lose steam, and he's the God who will carry us through 2023. Because if God is for us, then who can be against us?